Good afternoon, everyone. So if you have the agenda for today, then you probably know that we're having a panel discussion here. And so the title of the panel discussion is the role of enabling organizations in driving social change. And I'm here to set the context for the discussion. So CDSSI wanted to understand how social purpose organizations, or SPOs, are using data and data-driven approaches. And this led to the two-part report series titled The Power of Data for Impact. In the first installment of the series, called A Study of Data-Driven Practices and Solutions in the Social Sector, we covered how some SPOs are already using data to enhance their work. The report also featured use cases and examples of organizations leveraging data to be more efficient and effective. And now, if you want to go through the report and learn more about how SPOs are using data, we have put up a few flyers with a couple of QR codes. Please scan the QR code and download the report. And so the part 2 of the landscape report, which gets released now, it builds upon the first installment, and it's titled An Overview of Data Enablers of the Social Sector. And it covers different enablers and the support they can offer to SPOs. So when we're talking about enablers in the development sector ecosystem, we are referring to organizations, entities, and policies that create the conditions for successful data-driven solutions. If you want to know more about enablers, you can also download part 2 of the report using the QR code on the flyer, and also listen to what our very esteemed panelists have to say on the subject. Our panelists, they're people who have actually played the role of enablers. And today we really want to understand their perspective on working with SPOs. So we hope that they will share their insights and experience on how their support has driven impact in the social sector. So the panel will be moderated by Dr. Anand Rao. Most of you have already met him, but those who are new, he is the professor of applied data science and artificial intelligence at Carnegie Mellon University, and he's also the chairperson of the advisory council for CDSSI. And okay, before I hand over the mic to Anand, please download both the reports. It's right here on the queue. Yeah, it's right here on the flyer. So please scan the QR code and download the report. And thank you. And over to you, Anand.
So allowed to invite my fellow panelists. So Manitya Kalkar from Goalkeep, Sandhya Vasudevan from Social Venture Partners, and Raj Segar Manoharan from Digital Green. Yeah, please take a seat. Okay. Yeah. So I always like to start with more of our personal stories, right? So that's why I did give a long introduction. I think you're better at giving introduction of yourself, more in terms of how you came to where you are, what drove you here, or would love to hear the personal stories. After three of you, I'll share mine as well. So maybe we'll start with you, Sandhya. Just pass on the mic.
Okay. I remember I was in the 5th grade when I had to sell TB stamps. My father is a doctor, and so I asked him, what is this about? He gave me a bit of an idea. At that time, he was teaching at Armed Forces Medical College. So my friend and I decided to go to the boys' hostel to sell it. We weren't very welcome. But I think my next one was with World Wildlife Fund. And again, it was in school. It gives you an exposure to international forums. How do they mobilize funds? And as a school kid, how can you get involved in their programs of identifying birds and other creatures? And that was when Serengeti was going through hell. So I guess a lot of my interest around the world is what got me into this space. From a professional perspective, yeah, right through every role I've played, you've always had some kind of CSR related activity. But over the years, I think one is I support the Shankara Cancer Foundation. You realize how tough it is to establish a charity type hospital. So that's a very personal thing. Deutsche, I used to head the, I had multiple roles, but one of them was to make sure the CSR program took off, which meant it was between 50 to 70 crores per annum, which is what we were putting into the social sector. I became part of SVP a number of years ago, but it was, for me, what appealed is the fact that you can get involved in programs that a normal corporate cannot. You're looking at capacity building, you're looking at supporting issues that others may not find very easy. So, for example, I hadn't appreciated how tough it is for the Devdasi children, even after so many years. They are struggling to find livelihood capabilities. They still slip back. It's not something that you think about for today. And we were just looking at the funding, second round, third round of funding. So I think that's what really gets me in this space. But I am with Ravi. It has to be driven efficiently, and you need to think about different ways to do it. The earlier solutions are not what we can have, because in my think tank capacity, we had one of the ex-ambassadors who's written a book on the social transformation. In the next 25 years, we have to make sure that nobody's getting free whatever it is, because they already have livelihoods that make them capable. So I think if we cannot bring about that kind of change, we will be living in the world of endowments and grants, whereas we should be creating wealth for everyone. Sorry, it's a long one, but I'm very passionate about it.
Hi, I'm Manije. Really thrilled to be here. I think I've met Ravi, I've met Shweta, and they're thinking about, we need to think about this differently, and to see a growing community is really encouraging. So I started working in the nonprofit space when I was in college with an organization called Akanksha, and I'd volunteer after college to teach. Spent a lot of years in program implementation in the nonprofit space. And I think for me, as a nonprofit implementation person, it was frustrating that we don't look at our own data. And a lot of times organizations collect information which is being thought of as something I need to report externally and to demonstrate impact rather than really what can I learn from it. And I think that personally was not how I wanted to look at my information. So that's where the journey started. I run Goalkeep today. So we work with nonprofits on how they can use their data more effectively. And we focus on three things. The first is, what should you be really measuring? Two, how can you now have accessible information, easily accessible to you? And two and three, finally, really, how do you use it to make decisions? And I have several stories, I think, from the work that we do. But one of them, I was working with an organization that works on employability. It's a young girl, SVP supported organization, by the way, who ran the mentor program. And I was looking at that data and trying to come up with a placement rate for the mentor program. And we'd analyze some information. And she looked at me and said, but this isn't fair. And I said, why? And she said, not all our students are looking for mentors. So we said, oh, okay, well, how do you know who wants a mentor? And she said, well, we don't have an opt-in process, and we should. And so we changed some of that information to make it a more opt-in process. And then as we started looking at information and trying to streamline our work and process and program with what we were learning from that information, one of the things that came out was a lot more girls opt for a mentor than boys. But when it comes to actually being matched, it's the boys that were getting matched. Now, part of it was families didn't allow girls to travel out of the community. Part of it was you didn't have female mentors, and the girls only wanted to be matched with women, right? So you were able now to look at your data and say, as a program, I need to start much earlier. I need to talk to parents about what this program can do for these girls. I need to go out and find more female mentors, especially in geographies where we don't see industries. So that's, I think, for us, what data can do for an organization and really give you, one, a sense of progress in your work, but also help you see how you can navigate to get better outcomes not just to demonstrate outcomes. I think that's me.
Hi everyone. Hello everyone. I'm Rajshekar. I'm representing Digital Green. I'm working on the AI and data science parts in Digital Green. To give a rough, quick background of myself, for the last 10 years, I've mostly been in the AI or engineering space, primarily in the startup world. So I've worked with a bunch of startups. I myself had a startup on drone image processing. My venture into social reach out programs or social development kind of initiatives is fairly new. I've only been working in Digital Green for the past 6 months. But before becoming an entrepreneur, I was a assistant professor at IIT Madras for a couple of years. And just when I was leaving there, I actually worked with the World Bank. It was a POC where we were trying to build a system to collect rural development status from different villages in Tamil Nadu. It kind of gave me a good feeling. So that's what I was looking for. And even a Digital Green, that is something I'm really liking compared to my previous jobs. It kind of gives a good satisfaction that what we are building is something of impact. I think that primarily drives me. To give a short intro about Digital Green, we are a foundation. The parent company is registered in the US, where it's also a nonprofit. We primarily do build technology to disseminate agricultural data better. So we have a family of frontline workers in Kenya and a few other places in Africa. And we are working closely with the government here on building DPIs, digital public infrastructures. The government already has a few DPIs in agriculture. So we are working with the particular departments in pushing this data in a way that, there are some protocols where you can push data in a very open source way and anyone can use it even for commercial reasons. So we are trying to bring in that kind of a structure into the agri data in India.
Thank you. Thanks for your stories. So the reason I wanted your stories first was you're all coming in very much from the social side, social purpose organization side. My journey was from the other side, more from the corporate world that Ravi was mentioning. So again, grew up in India, 35, 40 years, very much in the commercial sector. So all along in AI. So in Australia for a few years, for a decade or so, then in London, then in US. And along that journey, obviously working quite a lot in data analytics, AI, very much for the commercial sector. And I think the areas where I started getting more involved in the broader societal issues was probably around the 2010 timeframe. So interestingly, it was the Clinton Foundation, which came to us again as a consulting project to look at women and women empowerment, and to look at trying to quantify what will happen if the women participation rate was the same as the male participation rate across the world, right? So how much delta GDP would it increase is what they were asking. Of course, it was just before she was going for election, right? So there's obviously a political undertone to it, but we did the analysis. So we did a very global analysis. And then we also went in very much, took India as an example, and to look at women and health, women and education, and women and violence, right? So what was telling from the data, and we built the data, we built some quite sophisticated models, but what the data told us was you get a woman educated, right? So it starts from there. Then their health is better. Not only is their health is better, but the family's health is also better. And then the boys and girls, but more importantly, the boys grow up in an atmosphere where they treat women more respectably. But this doesn't happen immediately. There is a generational gap, right? So most of the data was not picking up that, right? So it takes time, right? So, and what impact you would have, and just picking that education, women being educated sort of as an overall impact, but a more delayed impact. So there is an eye opener, but then got very much involved as AI was coming into the fore in a number of national AI strategies. A number of countries were asking, what do we do with AI? What's the impact of AI? And of course, quite a bit of that was hey, how do we generate more GDP? How do we build more skills? Also, they were concerned about what are some of the negative impact of AI. And that's how we gotten more interested into responsible AI and societal implications of AI. And there's a whole community, there's a whole group on AI for good, how to take some of the same algorithms, and as we were saying, how do you apply it in various social sectors. So that's how I got interested. And the way I came in here, I still remember the day was very much meeting Ravi and Gaurav. I think it was 2022, November or so, we met in Boston, and he told very much the story that you all just heard. And that story was enough for me to say, whatever happens, I'm definitely working for you. Right. So, and of course, I was retiring in June 2023. Actually visited last year around January, February, started slowly getting involved with the whole team here. And that's my route into ISDM. And as you have all articulated, right. So, and as Ravi has articulated as well. So the notion is, can we bring in quite a few of the things that are happening in a positive sense in the AI commercial world to the social sector, right? So, and again, we have talked about it multiple times. Can you create a facilitating platform like a Hugging Face that probably some of you are familiar with, where you're bringing in data scientists, you're bringing in social purpose organization who come up with the problem, but they don't know how to solve it, right? So, but you have, I mean, India is the highest. I mean, if you go to the recent AI index, India has the highest number of AI machine learning experts. It doesn't come anywhere near in terms of the number of patents, of number of papers published. But if you look at the talent, India is sort of right at the top there. In terms of the number, we are highest, right? So of course, percentage-wise, we're probably not that high, but still numbers-wise, we are very high. And so there's a pent-up thing where I think our kids want to contribute their time. And of course, the social purpose organizations have the problem. So create a platform where you can house the data, you can bring the data scientists, you can bring the social purpose organizations and facilitate that interaction is what CDSSI is trying to do. So just wanted to mention that. And I know Bhavna mentioned about the report, right? So definitely, please take a look at the report. And I'll just give a little bit of a brief into that. And I think the panel is sort of structured around that. We're calling someone enabler, right? So of course, there are social purpose organizations, and we're calling them data and technology enablers. Similarly, there are financial enablers as well, but here we are talking much more about data and technology enablers. So how can, let's say, a consulting organization, I think we at Capgemini as one of the judging panels there, or any of these consulting companies, or even the cloud companies. I know Google is sort of heavily into some of the social good areas, right? And all of the other players as well. How can some of those companies essentially enable this through the CSR programs, through various other programs that they have? Of course, we have a number of billionaires in India as well, right? So, and of course, they are investing. So how can we harness all of that towards a central purpose to solve something more meaningful? That's what we talk about, data and technology enablers. Again, the report goes into the details of different categories. I'm not going to go into all of those categories. You'll see there the different categories and how they can essentially enable or help the social purpose organization. So as we said, we want to connect the social purpose organizations with the people who have the data, who have the technology, and build the capacity. I think you mentioned the capability building, build it, and it'll happen over a period of time. And that's what we wanted to do. So, I mean, given that kind of preview, I wanted to ask you, Sandhya, what according to you is the role of enablers? And whether it can be data, it can be technology, it can be just getting people comfortable talking about some of the very difficult issues. And I know you have very experienced both in the commercial sector as well as in the social sector. What do you think are some of the role of the enablers and how it's evolving?
I'll give 4 examples. I'm part of a think tank, and we had a sense maker who's an ex-ambassador who's written a book. And that's what I was actually looking for, where the name, it just, I just couldn't remember the name right now. Maybe I'll share it later. So like you, He's retired and he's now in the education sector. And his main aspiration is in the next 25, 30 years, you should not have the 500 million people below poverty line. People like that set a target, a vision for many of us to say, how do we work for that? Rather than looking at incremental change, what are the step changes that we can do? So you need advocates who can look at things in a macro level. The second example is from IIIT Delhi, where I'm part of the board of governors, and two examples from there. Delhi city, any of you who are familiar with it, the traffic is crazy. You have hundreds of buses. So they've actually built an app which tells you that bus which you want, bus number 78, is going to come near your place in the next 10 minutes. And it's live. They've been working on this. It's a social sector problem in a way. If you are a young mother who's trying to get a kid to school and then get to work, these kind of things are going to make a huge difference to the quality of life. The second one, which ties into one of the examples that you were giving, is they're using AI across 23 AIMS, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and they're looking at the prenatal pediatric data to say predictive, which ones are likely to go into septic shock, whatever it is. Now that enables the readiness of the hospital to handle that. So that's a practical, you pick a problem, solve for it, cross-disciplinary problem using data. The third one, which is from my Deutsche days, we worked with the government of Maharashtra, along with, I think, EY, plus the Tatas and a whole range of people, to look at how do you change at a district level some of the parameters that at that time it was mainly water that we were focused on, but a number of other parameters. So you can look for data-driven solutions. How successful were we? I don't know. I'd left that program by then, but it is a shift in looking at it the way we would do in the commercial sector. The last one, which I will pick, is very different. A lot of us work in the rural area where you have handicrafts, food items, everything. None of us are thinking about getting that IP'd. That is your country's well. If you get that IP done, commercial value of that goes up by 30 to 40%. So let me share a story there. In Sundarbans, they make one laddu, shelf life 36 hours. Once they got it IP'd, they put it in dry ice to send it through post. Shelf life 7 days. So anyone who loves that laddu is going to get it. If you send it abroad, 15 days, it's really good. There are women who are getting that. I can give you 3 other examples. But what's important is India's got only 600 GI tagged items. This sector is the place where you can get it to move up to minimum 6 lakhs. 600 is ridiculous for a country like India. 6 lakhs in 3 years is what we should be aiming for. And if we can do that, the livelihoods will improve, micro activity will change. And there's a whole, we were looking at it for inland fishery. We were looking at it for all kinds of things. So I think, to my mind, these are kind of things that will be major shifts, not incremental things. Sorry, I took a lot longer, but I'm...
Yeah. So that's great, right? So you were saying about very specific examples and how you can enable it, right? So now maybe Maria, you can address this. So if you start addressing very specific point solutions, yes, you're doing something very meaningful. How do you, while doing that, also develop the capability? So skills and capabilities, so that you're thinking much more on a sustainable basis as opposed to just one-off instances.
Does this work? Perfect. I think for us in our work, the idea is that we don't want to solve the same problem for that organization again. And so there is that lens of solving the problem in a longer term way. And I think for most organizations, I'd say one of the biggest challenges is actually people. Like you've said, how many data scientists there are, but how many of those are available to the nonprofit sector? And there was a study recently, well, not very recent, about what percentage of organizations collect data. Do you know? Any guesses?
1 or 2%?
No. Collect of data.
Maybe all of them collect data.
It's 90%.
90%, yeah.
And able to use it in decision making?
2 to 5%.
5%. Right. So I think that's where the gap is. And so in order to address that gap and build that capability, I think one is just finding access to the right technologies. So there's so many people who don't even know what is available, how to choose. It could be as simple as data collection tools, cloud storage, computing services. There's a lot out there. And if I'm not a trained professional, I don't even know where to start. So it's pretty intimidating. I think the other piece is just the general talent available within the sector. And I think for our projects, one of the focuses to upskill people while we're working on the project so that they can manage whatever outputs and work we're creating. I think the third really is this thought of data literacy, where really today it is just like knowing how to read and write. And as I look at information, am I able to evaluate its quality? What is the source? Where it's coming from? Can I make some decisions based on it myself? All of those pieces need to come together. And I think when I think about why only the 5% use it, it's not for lack of want. I think every organization we speak to wants to do AI, right? I wants to get there and say, how can I have algorithms that will help me? But I don't have the data today that'll even get me there.
That's great. Yeah. So that sort of almost naturally leads to you, Rajsekhar. So you've been obviously a professor at IIT, now going into digital green. How do you think that we can improve the data literacy, and then also try and get the social purpose organization sort of tuned to the benefits of some of this technology, right? So no one will do anything unless they really see the benefit. How do you do that while at the same time also educating them about it?
So in my experience at Digital Green and other places, what I've noticed is that you mentioned before, we have enough talent in data science. We have a lot of people who can do data science. It's mainly about setting up the framework of collecting the data and then like providing it in an open way that anyone, even outside the organization, maybe does this. So for instance, when I was a professor at Aston, I was only an assistant professor, but one of the assignments I gave to my students was to like look at data.gov.in and just find interesting plots. It was just like second year undergraduate students. So they were anyway going to make some plots. I was just asking them to take data out of data.gov.in. And really the presentations really, it was very interesting. They found very, it was completely open-ended. So some people had to spend some time to understand like what is the exact problem statement they're looking at. So it was kind of a different perspective for some of the students. But the final projects were really interesting. They were able to like find very interesting connections among the data. And this is all open source data, right? Somehow providing this kind of a framework typically catalyzes this integration of data and empowering social organizations using that, providing it free for open. For instance, part of Digital Green, we work with AI for Bharat, who develop a lot of these Indian language LLMs and Indian language speech recognition softwares. We are finding that that is something extremely required in India, because off-the-shelf speech recognition or something that doesn't really work when you go to rural places or even like outside cities where they have separate dialects of Hindi or something like that. These things completely break down. So kind of getting an India scale data platform here seems like a very important setup. So to summarize, I would say like an open data platform, something that they, DPIs, digital public infrastructure, something like that.
And I think you mentioned it, Sandhya. So I think in the early introduction about the data culture, I think one of you mentioned it. So we know that the data culture is difficult even in the corporate world, right? So in the corporate world, if the data supports my decision, I'll go with it. If the data doesn't support my decision, then yeah, the assumption is wrong. Just go and figure it out, right? So is the way people deal with it. Now, how do we, I mean, open to any one of you, how do we make sure that the social purpose organizations can really see the value of data and getting that data culture really in there, right? So I know we are talking about data literacy, and getting the data culture is a sort of a very much the other end of the spectrum. But how do you see that working in the SPOs?
So
Go ahead.
we do a lot of work on data culture. I think that's all we talk about. It is about people. And I think the first thing, and since we have funders here as well, I think moving away from this obsession with showing results. And can we really, and I mean that genuinely, not just at a funder level, but through an organization, can I actually learn and be open to the fact that some things aren't working? And if we can create that environment in our organization, when people are looking at data, they're much more likely to feel invested in looking at it. I think there's been many instances where we've told leadership in organizations, the first time you look at the data set I'm going to give you, think of it like how I looked at my bank statement for the first time and realized how much money I spend on Swiggy, right? Take a deep breath and don't do anything for 2-3 months, because you have to let people engage with information without it feeling like a stick, and it has to become that carrot. So that would be, I would say, the first thing that people can do and that donors can do in terms of really encouraging people to be open about how they look at data. I think the second piece really is just understanding how things are interconnected. Like very often we find that people who work in technology don't understand the field. People who are working in strategy are thinking about something else. But those pieces need to come together. And at the end of the day, your technology is a means to an end. Your data is knowledge and information. You're working towards a goal and a mission. And unless all of that aligns, you're going to keep working in these different bits and then say, I don't have the right culture.
Okay. I tend to tell stuff with stories only, partly because that's how I remember. One of the projects that I'm involved with is agri-fintech. If you look at it, you have 600 million people involved in agriculture-related activities in our country. Minimum 600. You can take the numbers, up, down, whatever, but around that number. Karnataka has got 40 e-mandis. You have the land data. You have the names of the farmers, whether tenant, non-tenant. You have the data which says what do they produce, the quality of their produce, price at which they produce, the soil information, which is from satellite data, and the water data. What are we doing to move up the value chain? As soon as we talk agri-fintech, everyone thinks it's the bottom of the pyramid transformation. The reality is in the Western world, only 1% of people are in the farming sector. And if you look at the contribution of 600 towards GDP, we've got a skewed thing. So we've got to think of livelihoods. We've got to think of sustainability. We've got to think of it in terms of what are the fundamental changes to be done. So for example, one of the fundamental changes that was done was allowing bamboo to be grown in our country. Even though we were natural second largest producers, we couldn't use it because of the way it got classified. Now, there's a lot of work happening in building out, let's say, a farm perimeter with that. That means the livelihood goes up. So for me, I think data is absolutely vital for transformative action. But we also need to look for solutions which is not the way we've done in the past. For me, that's where the power of data comes in. If we don't do that, we'll be doing the same solutions for the future. That's not going to make any change. I'll give you one other example. There's something called interspecies money. If any of you are interested, have a look at it. One of the universities in Bangalore is trying to build out a climate stack around it. And again, AI data will have to come in. They look at how much does it cost for you to for that species to survive. So if it's elephants, right from your corridors to everything. But it's not going to be that simple because it's a man-animal conflict, developmental issues. So it's not just the data, but it's going to be far more complex than that. It's the human side of it.
Yeah, I think specifically on the agri side, I was actually interested in getting into agriculture before like getting into data science of it. But what I noticed was similar to what you're saying, the ROI directly on agriculture is very low. It's like 4% or something on the capex of like buying the farmland and things. But if you like make a cloud kitchen, it's and a good idea, and if it clicks well, right, it's like 40%. So clearly, like the value add somewhere, there is somewhere value add in between, right? We can probably empower agriculture also using data or something like this. Specifically to the question of quality, right? Like how do you enforce quality of the data collected, especially on from social sector, right? I think again, if we make it open for criticism or usage, really like putting it online, that is really helping because you have some standardization. But also like what I've noticed in the DPIs, right, digital public infrastructures that the government is building, they allow a lot of private players also to work there. So somehow there is, I don't know, I mean, there is some objective that is being added to make it like good quality automatically there. So I think those are kind of like the quick thoughts on this.
Yes, I wanted to make two comments based on what you just said. One is on the agriculture, right? So I had the opportunity to work with a startup, Silicon Valley startup, on precision agriculture. Now, the sort of to keep the story short, the likes of Monsanto, right? So huge organizations, they're bringing their research scientists and it's a 5-6 generation of agriculture, trying to look at how do I predict yield? How can I make the yield better by farm, by area? So they were trying to do that. Obviously, they had a huge research program doing it. There's literally a bunch of 150 people in the Bay Area. The CEO was an ex-Googler, and they go and literally over 2 years, they build a model, which was very much unlike what Monsanto was doing. And what they did not use any advanced sensors. This was 10, 12 years back, but they were just getting information back from the farmers. So they'll predict something, the temperature, the pressure, the quantity of corn that will be produced from a specific field within a certain range. As the temperature increases, decreases rain, that range will start changing, right? So they'll predict exactly how much, when to sow the seed, when to harvest it, when to fertilize it. Everything was being done. Initially, the model was not accurate, but literally within 2 to 3 cycles, they were getting the information back from their farmers. So their models became very accurate. What their secret sauce was, the models were by field. It was not a gigantic model, which is what Monsanto was trying. So they were going at very specific fields. Not only did they knew what fields and where, they could measure the exact temperature difference between a corn of cob in the middle of the field versus the side of the field. They look at the chlorophyll content of the leaves and when the pods will mature, right? So very sophisticated. And it was all done with literally 150 people. And the Monsanto folks were still wondering how can a few people who don't understand agriculture essentially beat us at our game, right? So it's a very, very illustrative example of how data is sort of powering that up, because they had some of the agricultural PhDs and so on, but not as much as what Monsanto was doing. And it's a good example of driving that change. And they were one of the first unicorns that were bought $1 billion with literally zero revenue. So they were bought by Monsanto. The other point I wanted to make about is the data culture. One of the things that I think when we talk about data, we typically think about numbers, right? So data is numbers, structured data, right? So do all the calculations, but data need not be just numbers. It could be qualitative, right? So, and looking at qualitative data, building trust in people, right? So that can be quantified, right? So there are methods, system dynamic modeling, where you can essentially quantify qualitative things. And there may be another way of making people much more amenable or using the data, not necessarily in a numbers way, but more on the qualitative side. And then I think the other point that you mentioned is the impact. The impact, again, I think it's again back coming from the corporate world. Everything needs to be measured in terms of an ROI, return on investment, as opposed to what is the overall social good, social impact. That impact can be qualitative, right? So the impact is not quantitative, right? So those are some of the ways I think we need to sort of change our mindset. So data is not just quantitative data, and impact is not just pure numbers, it's sort of qualitative impact. I wanted to open it up to the audience, see if there are any questions. We can continue with a few more, but wanted to just get the audience involved. Any questions so far from what you have heard? Feel free.
Thank you. So this is a question actually we were talking about earlier as well, Anand and I. The other day I attended a talk of Anand's, and there were a lot of young entrepreneurs in the room, all data scientists, very young lot, very passionate, very energetic, very excited about the world they live in, which is the AI, Gen AI world. And they were talking to me about what ISDM is and what we do. And I said, oh, we work with the social sector. And 3 or 4 of them said, what do you mean by social sector? What does that mean? Right. So while I'm listening to all of you talk, and we're thinking about how do we get these different stakeholders to sort of come together to, collectively work towards social change. What can we do? If I flip the question, what can we do? Those of us who exist in this world, right? The social sector, as we call it, and today that's become larger than just the grassroots field implementing organizations, right? What can we do to help others understand what the needs are within this sector, right? Or how they can help? And from your own experiences, if there are ways in which you do it or have seen others do it, up to here.
Okay. Why don't you go first?
So especially on the tech side, there are open source forums and conferences where you can like go and pitch your problem statement, and you would get very insightful answers, especially from the open source community. The quality of the technology they build is also very world class of sort. Yeah, that would be one, especially on the technical side, that would be how I would approach it.
Oh, I think one of the things we can do is just have more people understand our work. So Omika and I had a data analyst on our team, and she used to be at TCS. And I don't think a TCS gives you any idea of what really your work is about. You do a tiny little thing and you're a cog in the wheel and you have no clue. I think the work she did when she was with us was from interviewing a stakeholder to how they were going to use an app to what they did with the data that they collected, and then did they register enough parents or not. She'd never seen something like that end to end, where she analyzed something and said, oh, this is from Bokaro, this is where I'm from, right? So I think if we can have more people, the kind of work you see in the social sector, you really can connect with, and you can see a direct impact of your work. And maybe if we can make that visible to people, it will help more people come into the sector and contribute.
One of the areas I've been looking at is how do you do funding for things that take anything between 5 years to 25 years. You're going to look at grants, you're going to be looking at long-term returns. If you look at the healthcare sector, even the vaccines, because this is it, sitting in on one of the sessions there, they started it 25 years ago and it's going live today. You're waiting for funding, you're not sure whether you'll get it, you get thrown out of your career. That happens in every sector. So to assume that this is an issue only for the social sector is not correct. If you look at the AI deep tech, we are talking about patient funding where you need money for the end user to use your product anything between 5 years to 25 years. So for example, there's one young man who's 25 years old. He's created a quantum chip. I don't know what it really does, which is to be a semiconductor, but it is one of the first in the country. There are very few outside. We don't have a pure sciences R&D lab to take it forward. You don't have an industrial R&D lab to take it to commercial thing. For us to build that out will take 10 years, even with the quantum mission funding. So the challenge of the social sector is no different. So the way I look at it is pick a problem, take it to the largest scale possible, say at the country level, build your AI associated with it, get people from different sources. So one of the areas that we've been looking at from the think tank is creative economy, your crafts, music, dance, drama, everything. It is embedded under 13 different government bodies. Possibly about 400 people, 400 million people involved in that sector, bottom of the pyramid. We were looking at what does creative economy mean? What is the IP that you can pull out of that? And therefore, how does that change? And then if you look at what is their contribution to GDP, how does that conversation change? You will find that it gets a very different lens to your problem solving. And you'll get funding from very different sources. I think, Ravi, and you had mentioned, you have alternate sources of funding when you look at the problem with the social sector incremental versus I'm solving it for GDP. You'll get money from all kinds of sources. And they have long-term vision. UN is looking at this topic 20, 25 years. And the money will flow. It's not a problem. I mean, coming from the financial sector. So it's a question of how do we position it? It's not a question that people don't understand, but what is the problem you're trying to solve?
So paint that vision. Yeah, great example. Yeah, please. Yeah.
This is just to take a step back and including the point that Ravi was making when he was making the presentation. Do you think there's a use case in the development sector where we're not necessarily looking at specialists to come together, but you aspire to have generalists? I think the point that she was making in terms of people don't understand data, and it's a lot of effort to sort of look at it because they're on the field. So people on the field don't understand data, and that's a problem we face. Qual experts don't understand quant data, quant experts don't understand qual. And a lot of the idea around building a team with such specialists is probably coming from classical management theory, right? Do you think in the Indian context, or not in development context, rather, given how complex it is, and the expectation is you understand what to solve before you get to solve it, do you think there's a valid case to not aspire to assimilate group of subspecialists, but assimilate generalists who understand a bit of field, who understand a bit of data, and you get some experts for a particular task, but not to solve the data problem of the data side of the problem, but I think so. Just any thoughts on that?
Not sure. I can just tell you from, I guess, our work. I think there's a space for both the generalist and the specialist. And the way we see ourselves functioning with organizations is the generalist actually brings a lot of that, getting people to connect and making sure that all those dots get connected. But beyond the point, I cannot be a specialist in everything. And in the world we live in today, we don't need to be. There's so much information out there. So if you can tap into that specialist for the right thing at the right time, some amount of, problem in understanding and sharing is probably what you need.
I'll just add, the national education policy calls for interdisciplinary problem solving. Call for it. The cluster innovation centers that got set up in Delhi 10, 12 years ago, that was, you pick a problem, and say, who do you need to bring to that table? Maybe I don't understand anything about that particular problem, but I understand where I can get the money for you. Maybe she knows the depth of educational transformation that's required in that field. He has the AI. Three of us in the room, and we say we're going to solve this problem, we are more likely to get it.
So very much agree with the sentiment here. So the way we look at it is as a P or sometimes as a pi, right? So what I mean by that is you need a level of knowledge across the board, which I think everyone needs to have, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're in the social organization or whether you're in a corporate organization, everyone needs to have that breadth of knowledge. By nature, by training, we are also probably deep in at least one. So arguably, you probably need two these days, but at least one we are. So you need to have enough of an expertise at the generalist level to know which specialist to call on, right? So you don't want to call on the wrong specialist. So to that extent, you need to know all of the different specialities that exist, but you don't need to be the specialist. At the same time, there will be specialists who would basically be deep in one, right? So there, I would argue that you probably nowadays need to be deep in two at least. So you're bilingual, and there is sort of more opportunities for if you're bilingual or multilingual from a competency perspective than if you're just one. And that would sort of a pure, straight research, very deep research, solving something. Whereas if you're trying to again go anywhere outside of very deep research, then you need to bridge multiple disciplines. And again, that works in the scientific engineering discipline and also works, I think, in social sector. But a great question, and that's often the challenge as well. And there are countries that actually, Finland, for example, has a curriculum for training all citizens about AI. And how many of you knew that all citizens go through very basic education on AI? Why? Because they don't fear AI, and they can make informed decisions when they come to electing their representatives and so on. They're not sort of disinformed. Right. So, and a number of other countries are also trying to do some of that. So again, there's both an opportunity side and a fear side with the AI data and so on. So you need to handle. Any other questions? Okay, yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, good, yeah.
But just to add to his last point, right? I think the generalist versus specialist debate is also there in corporates, really. And myself coming from an academic setup, I don't consider myself a specialist anymore, really. But typically, like universities would have like very core specialists who are like doing PhDs in that and like figuring out things. Typically, what I've noticed in the social sector is like there is more of an orchestration layer where it's better to be a generalist. And even if you are a specialist, it's better to like gain those new skills to become more of a generalist. Yeah, that's about it. Mostly, I mean, this is also a common thing in corporate. So most HR departments have a strategy to answer this, right? At the orchestration level, they usually hire generalists. But as and when you get like specific pieces that need to be quickly made, you would want to get a specialist to just quickly tell that.
Right. So my question was sort of requesting a comment from whoever can in terms of what is currently available that you think can be refined and harnessed versus where is there need that we maybe need to start from scratch? Because a lot of the work that would start from scratch is what could need more money and more people, your resource planning then gets affected. But considering that a lot has been happening, how can we work that balance out so that one, there's no duplication of work, and second is that we can look at what there is and work towards making it better versus thinking that we need to start from scratch to do with everything possible that's existing right now, from I think problems to solutions. So I just wanted to know if anyone has thoughts on that.
Yeah, usually on the engineering side, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? So even in projects, we typically want to find out which are the pieces which are already available. Typically in innovative industries, it is a hard game because you don't know what is already available, especially if we are making startups, innovative startups like, I don't know, precision agriculture or something. It's very hard to know what is already available because it's a very, innovative setup. But in the social sector, I think depending on the problem statement, these days there's a lot of data available. So most cases we are able to like find at least a POC that's already available. At least the pieces are available, and then we'll have to like put together a framework and start collecting data in that particular format and things like that. I guess I'm answering more on the technical side, but with that,
I'm one of those who sits on giving grants. And if you look at the education sector, that's where a lot of it comes to. If you're in a company or even SVP, even though we said we'll spread it out across different things, you have the same problem. Everyone comes with the same variant of that solution. And the willingness to partner with others is very low. The social sector is not looking for partnerships. They don't want the partnerships. Mine is so unique. My heart goes out in this direction, not the other. I'm being a hard-headed commercial person. You have opportunity to go to scale only if you hold hands with others and move it forward, not just being focused on one thing. So I think if the social sector can change one item, that would be it. We should not be having so many millions of NGOs, most of whom are doing the same thing. And I don't see the return on investment. For money is scarce. And we keep on giving it to 10 different people. Whereas if we were to collate it and standardize a lot of those practices, we may be able to make huge changes. So which is why technology comes in a big way for that. So I'm a great proponent of do your own thing, but have a standardized layer through which you work.
Yeah, unfortunately, on the technology side, also I've seen a counterpoint where people build very similar system. It will be like a similar server or whatever API. But unfortunately, people have built like 5 different groups have built the same thing for Agri, for instance, right? And then now there is a lot of impetus, like impedance to like put them together into like one platform that works. There I found like the programs that like the conferences we have are very useful because yeah.
That's right. Yeah, no, just to sort of finish off on this. Also, I think there is, at least on the data science side, there's sort of much more of a common platform evolving, right? So of course, there's a closed systems like all the OpenAI, Microsoft, and so on. But there is so much of open software that's available, which is available for everyone, right? So, and we don't have to go and replicate any of that for what we are doing. We just need to apply it to the problem that we are facing. Of course, you need people who are sufficiently skilled at that, like all the teams that we just saw today, like including you. But I think if that grows, again, we can build on it, right? So, for example, LLMs. Again, we are just funding one of the organizations in the fellowship, which is essentially it's for the blind. It's a blind person developing solutions for the blind, and what they are doing is sort of very simple yet very powerful, right? So they're saying, don't show us pity. We want the same information as everyone else in the world. Why can't we have that? Now the technology allows them to do it. So all they're going to do is take material, right? So educational material that's obviously available largely in English, I would say. And they're using LLMs, large language models, to essentially convert that into speech. Now, as they're converting into speech, not only are they converting into speech, they're converting into multiple languages. So now it's available, or it will be available throughout India, right? So existing technology applied in a very specific way for a specific community. It's not that there are no blind people elsewhere, but once you prove it in India, we could take it in everywhere else, right? So that's a very good example of, I think, so much has already been built that we can go off from there. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? So, and of course, there may be cases where for national interest, national security, you may want to develop things, right? Again, that's something that happens at a policy level, and especially language models, there's an argument that you want to have your own language model, especially in a country like India with so many languages. But we can leverage whatever is already done while we build our own, right? So that's still possible. And I know there are initiatives to do that. So I know there was one more question.
So in the interest of time, I'll just quickly ask my question. So my question is, I maybe just want to get your perspective or your thoughts on the data literacy bit. So like, for example, because we play with data, we are skilled, analyzing the data, collecting it, coding, and, bringing the results and the findings. But what would be your thoughts when we say that this data now needs to go to a social purpose organization or a non-for-profit organization who are directly working with the beneficiaries? So in India, is social sector equipped in that regard? So
needs to go back to the social purpose organization. It needs to go back to the beneficiary themselves. And I think a lot of the problem is that we think of people as giving us data rather than there being our clients who the data should serve. So this piece around building that literacy, it probably, hopefully will be like part of our curriculum, where you learn to read and write and you learn to look at how to actually ask good questions of that data. And if we can build that, I think all organizations can get there.
That's right. Yeah. I feel that, I mean, it's the impact that should go to the social organization, not necessarily the data and the evidence backing it. Maybe some of the backers might need, why are you saying what you are saying? But if the recommendation, the insight coming from the data is having an impact in whatever purpose that you're solving, I think that's proof enough. Right. So some people might say, oh, how did you get to that? Show me the evidence. So those are the people whom you need to sort of convince. And again, that's where the storytelling comes and visualizations come, right? So I think, again, very strong on visualization. So show them what is happening with the data, right? So again, not with graphs and charts and so on, but with visually, right? So, and bring it to life, then you can go and explain, right? So I think that's part of, again, data literacy, data visualization. So something that people can see as opposed to numbers. Again, they get put off by numbers and charts and so on, right? So as soon as you have 5 or 6 dates that they're saying, hey, what is this? What does this line mean? And so on, right? So that may be another way.
Examples, you go to the airport and the actor is there. You don't know how to handle it. You have a mic. Sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah. So you go to the airport, you have the DG Yatra, and you have a lot of, right now they're mainly young people who will tell you how to get that done for you. Immediate result, I don't need to pull out any paper as I go through the security checks. I like it. And it doesn't matter if I go there 10 times, I'm still going through somebody helping me. And it's going to take a couple of years before, you don't need that anymore. You need the same thing, let's say, in the farming sector. You need these activists who will be around to help them. Maybe it could be college kids who go there for 3 months at a time. Get them comfortable with, oh, you go to the Mandi, this is what you can use, this is how it can be done. So you are going to need that kind of transformation. We actually did digital literacy with Bhelpuri vendors in Pune. That lady, I don't think she'd even passed the 3rd or the 4th standard. She started using WhatsApp. She started increasing her, business. So all the others on the road asked her to teach them. So you have enough activists to, change activists.
That's a great story. Yeah, it's a great story. So I think to close off a rapid question. So one recommendation for social purpose organization and one recommendation for enablers, data technology enablers. So what should they do if what should you do if you're a SPO? What should you do if you're a technology enabler? Just one.
Yeah, I would say if you're a social purpose organization, maybe reach out to public forums where you can get in touch with enablers. Make the problem statements more open, right? People shouldn't have to come to the organization to know what is the problem. That should be on the website. Or I'm just extrapolating for an ideal case, but somewhere in between, right? We can draw a line somewhere in between. On the technology side also, I think maybe I'll gather my thoughts and come back.
Sure. Yeah.
For a social purpose organization, I'd say do less, but do it better. I constantly find that there are so many metrics and I don't know what to look at. Look at 12 and it'll give you a lot more. for an enabler, I would say enable organizations to really experiment and learn and set up that culture within them.
Great advice.
For a social organization, define the problem. Don't say we are different. Define the problem. You'll have people coming to solve it. For the enabler, listen.
Great advice. Yeah. So on that note, let's thank our panelists for a great discussion.